All right, friends, welcome back. This is episode 134. We're going to talk about this week. I'm going to pick Carmen's brain on root causes to a weak immune system. I'm going to make a guess that most of you are listening are health conscious. I'm going to guess that our audience is like into healthy diets, clean water, drinking a lot of water, exercising some form or fashion, right? Like, we are health focused people. I don't know if everybody has this thought, but I do. It's I deserve to be healthy because I I do all the things that are required of me to be healthy, right? I don't bring illness onto myself by poor lifestyle choices. Right. So I wanted to dive into like, okay, healthy people like us, and we're getting sick, like what can be some of the root causes? Because I think it's going to be a process of elimination.
Yes, it usually is. When we're trying to find the root cause, it's always a process of elimination. It's always trying to figure out.
There's a lot of fucking patience.
It does. It's kind of like you're a detective, right? You're trying to figure out. I tell folks I'm trying to figure out, like the pieces to our puzzles, of what all's contributing there, right? Okay, so when you think of the immune system is this underlying safety net, right, if you will, within our body, and it's constantly on in some form or fashion, on the lookout for things that are foreign that shouldn't be in our body. And sometimes if we experience, or if we have conditions like liver conditions, like a high toxic load, or we've been around a lot of toxins, mold, things in the air, right, like exposure to chemicals. At this rate, to be honest, if folks even just use a lot of like beauty products, like stuff you put on your skin, you have air freshener things in your house, or you spray air fresheners, or use like a scented laundry detergent, all of that stuff adds up. But the thing is so all those things they affect our detox pathways, but our liver is our largest organ in that detox pathway. Well, this technically is the skin, but the biggest player, if you will. So if our liver is functioning a little sluggish, if our liver is trying to work through a lot of toxins that we're exposed to on a regular basis, or we've had a high toxic load that's kind of built up, that's going to directly affect how well our body makes those immune cells. Okay, so we actually have to produce those B cells, produce those T cells. So if our liver is sluggish for whatever reason, if folks have like a fatty liver, or they've got a lot of inflammation or a lot of toxicity, that's just not going to happen, right? So then if you're not producing those immune cells, it's like you're not creating those soldiers. You don't have the army to go out, to even train to go out and do what it's supposed to do. Okay. So that's a very large root cause, especially that I see with folks. Inflammation is definitely one. And so inflammation has to go around lifestyle, diet, stress, right? Those are things that create inflammation in our body. And when that inflammatory response, it kind of dilutes the waters, right? So that inflammatory response is your body, your immune system working, making these antibodies, but they're not categorized to a specific bug, right? So it's just kind of this general, inflammation, right? Or it can be targeted to specific tissue when it gets into an autoimmune condition, but it's not categorized to a specific virus or bacteria like it's built to do.
Okay.
Yeah. So when we so if folks ingest inflammatory foods, right, sugar, dairy is usually the top of the list, stress, all of that creates that inflammation and kind of dilutes the waters so that your immune system isn't able to respond like we expect it to.
So when you talk about sugar, like how much sugar are we talking about?
So the studies show that a teaspoon of sugar, which I don't remember how many grams that is, but a teaspoon of sugar can actually slow down the immune. So it does two things. One, it slows down the immune response by 2 hours. Okay. The research that was done in the 70s was like 100 grams of sugar will stop or significantly slow down to like a snail's pace of our immune system 8 hours.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think like a thing of soda is like 80 grams of sugar or something. So maybe the average person, if you're drinking sodas or sweet tea, I think 100 grams is like a cup of sugar. So if you're drinking a gallon of sweet tea with sugar in it a day, you're pretty much knocking out your immune system. Okay.
Well, like I drink pineapple juice, probably 12 ounces.
Yeah, so that's a fructose.
Okay.
So fruit juices that don't have sugar added to them is a fructose sugar instead of a glucose sugar.
Okay.
So that doesn't have the same effect. Now it can still slow down our immune system, but it's not as like significant as glucose sugars.
Okay.
Like that you find in
like processed sugar, corn
processed
syrup.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So it is a little bit different.
Okay.
So that's one piece of it, is how much sugar, right, is actually slowing down your immune system. Now, the other piece is that if people are ingesting sugar on a regular basis, it's changing the environment of the gut. So then that's affecting how well or how much inflammation is coming from the gut. So that will slow down your immune response as well. So if people are just eating sugar like occasionally, right, and they're just doing like a piece of cake or like a piece of pie or something, and they don't already have inflammation from stress, or they don't already have a poor liver, then usually they'll do okay. Okay. So it's not that big a deal. But if you already have a lot of inflammation in your body, right, and then you like indulge in some sugar, usually that's kind of pushes the immune system over the edge and so you're like at a party, there's a lot of people, you get exposed to a bug, and so somebody may not admit that they're sick, or people may not be sick at the party. When you go home, they still say, oh yeah, everybody's still fine, a couple days later, but they introduced a bug that was different than your bugs, and triggered a reaction. Just slow one.
Gotcha. Yes. Okay, so we have toxicity, we have inflammation. We talked about hormones last podcast, that impacts it, and then chronic viral load.
Yes. Forgot. Okay, hold on before I go to that leg. So because this kind of has to do with the sugar too, but it's more of the digestive tract, right? So I always say, because we're always told, right, like 80% of our immune system's in our gut, right? So if our gut isn't healthy, that's still related to that immune system. But sometimes people can still have a clean diet and have like an imbalanced microbiome, like the bugs in the gut. So if people have like systemic candida infections, or things like a lot of gas and bloating, like a small intestinal bowel overgrowth, a SIBO, or even things like ulcers, like H. pylori is very common. That's a imbalance in the microbiome that will set people up so that they don't have a very good immune response.
Okay.
So I have to add that in with our digestive health as well. And then chronic viral infections. Okay. So this is another kind of like the inflammation, but the mechanism is different, but kind of like that because it's, again, kind of diluting the water. So if you have a chronic infection like chronic Lyme, chronic mono, if you have illnesses that flare, it's kind of your immune system is already trying to target that infection, that like, because it's a low-lying infection, it's not like waving a red flag like, hey, come and address this, but because it's that low-lying and it has become systemic, your body's trying to use those resources to keep that at bay. Or sometimes your resources and your immune system are kind of exhausted because it's trying to address that chronic underlying infection, that it's just not able to respond to a new introduction or a new bug that's introduced.
Gotcha.
So our body's very resilient, but there is an issue of like how it allocates its resources, right? A lot of our resources, especially when it comes to our immune system, is not, it's not infinite, right? Like it's a defined amount. And so your body's like, okay, where can I allocate these resources or these soldiers, this immune response that will give us the best effect, but also, right, like keep us alive. And so it has to kind of balance, kind of find that balance. So that's why sometimes it's like, okay, even though getting sick and a bug is bothersome, if there's something, underlying that's your immune system needs more attention, it's going to target that first. And that's, often what kind of makes a lower immune response to something new.
Gotcha. Gotcha.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. And so you talked about like, how would they know if, how do you start teasing all this out, process of elimination? Like, how would you even know, like, if you had a chronic viral load? Like a lot of us, I know kids that were born in the 90s, they started testing them for mono, but anybody before the 90s, they never tested us for mono, or nobody tests us when we, growing up here in Oklahoma, there's ticks all the time. Nobody tests us for Lyme disease. Right? Like, so how would we even know that that is an option out of these options?
So that's a great question. So it's, I try to find that root cause by going through somebody's history, right? We just kind of weed through what they remember. As far as history go, what does your health look like from when you were young? You're right. I had somebody come in this week who also, when she's younger, but when she was in high school, when she was 14 or 15, they told her she had mono. And she had mono like every couple months it would flare, and they said, oh, you've got mono again, and now there's a doctor who's she has a rheumatologist, and they tested it because I said, let's see if you have chronic viral mono. The rheumatologist tested and said, oh, you've never had mono before. And so she came to me, and so she was like, because I said, I think that could still be affecting your situation. We were trying to get them to run the test so the insurance would cover it. And when she came back and said, oh, he told me I've never had mono. I said, okay. She said, but I remember, her mom remembers, everybody in the family remembers because she was so sick. So I said, okay, two things are happening. Either one, they didn't run the right test. Okay. Because there are different ways to look for chronic mono versus acute, like somebody's sick today, like a rapid mono test, and if they've ever had mono, so if they even have antibodies, like their library even registers that they've had mono before. Okay, so those are different tests. So one, you got to make sure that the doctor's ordering the right test. Okay, oftentimes with chronic infections, like any of the above, you usually see symptoms that are systemic, right? So you don't just see, oh, like I have an infection in my knee and my knee always hurts, right? Like it's because it becomes systemic, you can, like with Lyme, you can see nervous system, you can see mood changes, you can see like numbness and tingling in the hands, you can see changes in the kidneys, changes, in the liver. So it's multiple organ systems, and they may kind of seem random. They may not always, like, you may not always see that connect the dots between those organ systems. That's often when I start to suspect, okay, maybe there's a chronic viral load. If there's chronic fatigue, if there's like symptoms that kind of seem unexplained by conventional medicine, all those things are cues that tell me, okay, something is going on. Let's, try to rule out if somebody's, if you've been outside a lot, if you had tick bites before, to be honest, mono, there's two different viruses that create mono, but mono is pretty much endemic in the soil in the US. So they say about 80% of people who've been exposed to mono by the time they're teenagers. Okay. The folks that actually get diagnosed because they have the symptoms, usually their immune system's already a little bit on the slower end to respond anyhow. And then that's why it kind of sets up into this chronic situation. Right. So then we go back and say, okay, well, when you had that original exposure to that infection, whatever it was, and it kind of seemed like it lingered for a while, what was your health like then? Right. Was there a lot of inflammation? Was there a lot of toxicity? Did you, like live in a place that was like a lot of new construction, or, like had family who worked with a lot of chemicals or solvents? So we kind of dig there and try to figure out, if we can connect those dots or not.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
That makes sense.
Yep. And inflammation, you could just do that by adjusting your diet.
Yes.
And your stress levels.
Yes.
Toxicity. How would they roll that out?
So toxicity, oftentimes, I look at like what their exposure's like. Right. So oftentimes I will ask people, what's your environment look like, right? Where you work, where you spend the majority of your time, in your home, at work, where in your car, wherever the majority of the day that you spend. Are there things like that you're worried about, like mold, right? Are there things like chemicals or things that you have been concerned about in the past? And then when you move from that environment, do you feel better? Right. So for example, if you've lived in a house for 14 years and you've been sick for 14 years, but when you go on vacation or when you go to grandma's house and stay for a week, you feel fine, right? Or you feel great. It's something environmental. Right. There's something, or if you're like a truck driver and you're sitting in a truck all day and then you have a week off and you feel better when you're at home. Yeah. I mean, some of it may be stress, but if you're in a different environment, maybe there's something in that environment that's creating a lot of toxicity. It's creating symptoms, things like headaches. Yeah. Again, low energy. You can see changes in the liver, since the liver is our largest organ. You can see changes in the liver where your liver enzymes on a blood test will start to be elevated. That can indicate, maybe there's a level of toxicity that your body's trying to deal with and it can't. If people have symptoms and they have things like constipation or an imbalance in their gut health, because that's how our body detoxes, right? It's through our waste, through our kidneys. So if there is a disruption in those organs or that part of the detox pathway, then things can kind of build up into our body and start to affect our immune response.
Okay.
Yes.
And then hormones would be...
So hormones, so just like you can test for liver enzymes, you can test for hormones. I prefer saliva or urine tests for estrogen and progesterone. If you pay attention to the timing, you can get some good data from serum blood tests for hormones as well. But you're trying to see those, that ratio of hormones. I can usually tell with folks, because I ask a lot of questions. I want to know what their, for women, what your cycle's like, right? Like, is it regular? Is it the same? Is it regular and consistent? So is it 28 to 30 days? Do you see where it comes, 25, 21 days, some months? Is it longer, 30, 35 days? What's the flow like? Is it changing? Has it been light and now it's heavy? Or has it always been heavy and now it's light? Right? Like those changes tell us things that are happening with our hormones. Do you experience a lot of symptoms like PMS type symptoms, mood changes, breast tenderness, things like that? The severity of our PMS symptoms. So PMS in general is a symptom, but the severity of those PMS symptoms is significant to tell me kind of what hormones are doing what. Yeah. And we can ask similar symptoms in men. The hormones are still somewhat cyclical. They're just not as prominent.
Yeah.
Right. But if they notice changes in like testosterone, or if men have ever been like, oh, you know what, I feel like maybe my testosterone's low. There's a hormone issue there. Yeah. So that can also affect your immune response as well.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So. Any other thoughts?
There's also, okay, just like we were talking about deficiencies, you can also be deficient in nutrients, micronutrients that affect our immune system as well, right? So a lot of folks know, especially around COVID, you've heard like vitamin D, vitamin C, like zinc, things like that, directly affect our immune system. So you can become deficient in vitamin C. And so again, if you're deficient, then your body can't make those immune cells like they're supposed to.
Okay.
Yeah. So that is also a component. So that deficiency could be because we're not getting enough in, or it could be because our gut health isn't great. We're not able to absorb those. Are usually the top two, either not getting enough in or we're not absorbing it well. Yeah. Okay. So those things we can do to help to kind of give our immune system better support. So that it can respond to things. Okay.
Yeah. So, as always, you have permission to discuss my stuff. So if we look at this, like, we'll just use me as a case study. If you have a kid, a teenage girl, all right, so I suspect that I have always been, since my first period, estrogen dominant. Yeah. And that would be a genetic factor.
There is a genetic component, especially if moms, sisters, aunts, grandmas have had symptoms of estrogen dominance. Things like endometriosis, or they've had hysterectomies at young ages. Yes.
All of that is in my family.
Yes.
So then that at 13 could have made my immune system not as robust. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Because estrogen dominant puts you in a progesterone deficiency picture.
Okay.
So yeah, that's the progesterone, the hormone piece. Okay. Yes. Yeah.
Okay. And so I want to explain to you guys, this is kind of how I put the picture together for those of you that are kind of in similar situations as me. As a kid, I was pretty healthy. I got sick once a year. I think that's normal. Yeah. Right? Like I got a cold, or I get a stomach flu, right? But like once a year, done. I didn't have any mental health issues. I turned 13 and I get my first period, right? And you could see a dramatic turn in my mental health. I started getting depressed and I started having suicide ideation. Both of those are connected to estrogen dominance.
Yes.
Correct?
Yes.
Okay. So, and then somewhere in between there and 21, I became fatigued all the time. So I think I picked up, because I had a not robust immune system. Yeah. Somewhere in there, I picked up either mono or Lyme. Yeah. I don't know. I'm guessing on that. You're my doctor. You can confirm or deny that. And then from here on out, I'm 42 now. I've just remained in estrogen dominance because nobody really helped. And then I've had to deal with this chronic underlying viral load. And then COVID hit, and I think it took my feet out from underneath me at that point.
Yeah.
And so now I'm on currently virus number 5 in a 2.5 month window.
Right.
So is that kind of what you're suspecting, like with a case like mine, like this probably started with estrogen dominant, then somewhere along she picked up a chronic and our immune system is just taxed at this point.
Yeah, it's kind of struggled over the years.
Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, it's not struggled for, you're not immune deficient, right? Like, other diagnoses, but, it's just kind of like keeping you, what do they say? Keeping your head above water, right? Like
treading water.
Yeah. That's where your immune system's at instead of, yeah. So yes. So I do, because of the fatigue and kind of the systemic symptoms that you've experienced, that points me towards, like, I think that there's like an underlying viral infection. Now, whether it's hard to test for Lyme, to be honest.
Okay.
There are tests for Lyme. They're just, it's very, what do I say? They're not as sensitive. Okay. They're not very sensitive. So you get a lot of false positives and a lot of false negatives.
Okay.
And they are not cheap tests. Okay. And so they don't always give us an accurate picture of whether somebody has Lyme or not. Yeah, because sometimes you have to wait till you're in a flare and you really feel terrible, and then that's when we can test, because sometimes the viral load will be a little bit higher, or the Lyme load will be a little bit higher. So it's easier to detect on the tests that they have available right now.
Yeah.
So that's why it's a little bit tricky, because you're trying to address a chronic underlying infection, right, as well as support the immune system if you get exposed to something new. Okay. Now, there are a lot of practitioners who are seeing like COVID long haulers. We are suspecting that their COVID can become chronic in some cases, where now it's becoming a chronic viral infection, a lot like mono, right? And a lot of times we are seeing that relationship, because if people already had a low functioning immune system with a chronic viral infection, now we're just, COVID is kind of like invited itself to the party, and it's like, hey, we're going to set up shop here. Yeah. So then it's even more important for us to not just support the immune system, but also try and address that viral, infection as well. Yeah. So, so that dilutes the waters to new things that you're exposed to. Yeah. And so even though for somebody who has a healthy lifestyle, right, who, doesn't eat a lot of processed foods, doesn't eat a lot of sugar, right, you can still, right, we can still support the body, but your body's still trying to allocate those resources in the best manner that it can, right? Yeah. And so, and because when a new bug is introduced, when you're exposed, if your immune system, one, is already trying to battle those things that we suspect is underlying, and there's a hormone imbalance, so that the better, or the new production of immune cells, right, to like bring them up and to train them and access that library, is also not responding, that kind of sets us up for an equation to get sick easily.
A nightmare.
Yeah. Yeah.
So then what would be okay, I'm trying to think this out. Like, we have these factors going on, and I guess, how did you figure out, because we didn't test for chronic viral load, did you just start putting the pieces together? Because I had thyroid, and then my kidneys have not done well. Is that what like turned the light bulb on for you? Like, wait, this is like, she's got several systems that are not functioning
so that's one piece of it, yes, because you had multiple organ systems involved. The second piece is you did the work, right?
Yeah.
For sort of like those first line, second line things. We addressed the stress, right? Like you were doing better with stress. We addressed the digestive system.
Yeah.
Your digestive system was doing better, right? We even addressed the allergies to a certain extent. They didn't completely go away, but there were changes, right? Like there were improvements. And so a lot of these other underlying things, I'm like, oh, what I would expect when you start to make those changes, I expect a little bit of a domino effect where everything kind of improves and cleans up. When it doesn't, that tells me we are not at the root cause yet. Okay. We've peeled back some of those layers on that onion, but we haven't gotten to the core. Yeah. Right. And so that's when we start looking at what other circumstances, would still be contributing when we've, kind of like picked that low-lying fruit. We've done, the work with the digestive tract, the stress, right? Like cleaning up the diet, all of that stuff. And there's still, significant things. It's usually detox, right? Like we did, the detoxes, and it's an underlying, that's why I suspect things were pointing in that direction. Yeah.
So the moral of the story is that this is a journey.
Yes.
You have to be patient as the patient and understand if you're going to go this route, it's going to be a process of elimination, trying things, peeling the layers back, and also doing the mindset work to remain positive and hopeful, because it gets pretty discouraging. But I hold on to the hope that eventually we'll figure it out and I'll feel better than I ever have before.
Right. So it is a journey, and it can be a long road and require a lot of patience. What I encourage folks is when you see those glimpses, like it's kind of opening up that window, right? Like there are times when you feel great, right? Like I have some people who call me and be like, I'm having a Superman day. Like I feel fantastic. And that may last a day, that may last a week, that may last a couple of months for folks. And then, kind of something new comes up. So I encourage people, when you feel like when you open those windows and you have periods where you're feeling fantastic, that your body is resilient, right? I don't see any reason why we can't get back to that place. Okay. Especially if the feeling, those feelings of fantastic are recently, right? It's not like, okay, this was 20 years ago, I felt fantastic, right? Or I haven't felt fantastic for like 10 years. I'm like, okay, there's a lot more, that's where we're starting on those layers. But in your situation, when you have those windows, I'm like, okay, we're on the right track, right? But this is what's tricky with viruses, with chronic infections. They're organisms. They have a mind of their own, right? Their whole motive and MO is to stay alive, right? And so as much as our body is excellent at, once I identify and getting rid of them, those bugs are constantly on the run. They're constantly trying to mutate, they're trying to adapt, right? Because they're trying to get to places where our immune system doesn't have as easy access, so that they can multiply and create symptoms so that you will spread them in other places. And so that's where it gets a little bit, it's not always a straight shot, because we're fighting against these organisms that also have their own agenda to stay alive. And they're going to find ways to do that within our body, because our body's pretty complex. So
anything else, any other advice you can give people as they begin this road of like, okay, my immune system isn't where it's at, here's some possible root causes that I can now process of elimination? Anything else?
So I'm always going to encourage people to work with a practitioner. Because especially if there's kind of, if you suspect a viral, a chronic viral issue or something like Lyme, a chronic infection, a practitioner will give you another perspective, right? And so I'm always going to encourage that, because oftentimes there's a lot of resources online, right? There's a lot of Facebook groups. There's a lot of like resources that you can get like tapped into.
Yeah.
And so those resources often give you that one perspective, and that one perspective over and over again, right, can kind of get to a point where we don't want it to define us, but some people will like step into that, like, no, this is our situation. But when we work with a holistic or a naturopathic practitioner, they can often give us a different perspective, and even how to address that chronic infection, right? Especially if you're like feel like you're hitting a wall and you're like doing the same thing over and over again, and like all the resources you're finding are pointing to, you know, these therapies or these resources. Let's branch out a little bit, right? Like, let's get a different perspective. So let some work with somebody to help you really like address it, but also to pivot, or like I tell folks that sometimes we are redirecting, because as our body changes and other symptoms may emerge, right? Knowing when to change supplements or when to introduce different ones can be really important in trying to kind of chase that bug and really like make significant progress.
Which I think brings up another point, especially for women, and I assume that's who the majority of people listen here is women. You're gonna have to reach in within yourself and advocate for yourself. Yeah. Right. You're gonna have to stand your ground and know that your intuition, you know your body better than anyone else, even that doctor. I love you.
No, you're right. I tell this people all the time.
But you're just going to have to be very persistent and advocate for yourself. And then also my other piece of advice that I have been awful at is I just want to trust you. So I'll just keep taking these supplements, and then I won't say anything. And it's like, well, it's just eventually going to work. And then we're 6 months down the line and you're like, okay, is this done? And I'm like, no, I haven't felt anything different. Yeah. It's because I don't want to like bother you. Yeah. Right. Instead of saying, like, understanding, like, no, this is how the game is played in naturopathic medicine. Like, we test and then we pivot. We test and we pivot. Like, you not saying something keeps us stuck in the game.
Right. So oftentimes when we're trying to stimulate the body's ability to heal itself, right, and we're trying to get to that optimal health, my goal is not to like recommend supplements to people that you're going to take for the rest of your life. Right. So, and I'm always encouraging people to listen to your body. Yeah. And speak up. Right. I think we have a tendency to become compliant with things. It's like, oh, okay, so yeah, maybe I have this symptom and yeah, it's kind of annoying, but it's not life threatening, right? Like, it doesn't hinder me from going to work or like taking care of my family, right? So we don't focus on, people don't say anything about it. Yeah. But when you advocate for your health and when you speak up and pay attention and listen to your body, that's when the practitioners will be able to help you the best, because it's like, oh, okay, this is changing, this is not changing, right? Like when I check in with folks, whatever the symptoms that they originally came in with, those are that's what we're using as the gauge, right? Like, or if they come in with labs, well, that's what we're using as the gauge. And I want to know, is it changed? How is it changed? Is it the same? Is it worse? Is it better? Right? And based on that, that helps us determine, okay, well, what are the next steps, right? Okay, we need to increase this, or we need to switch, to something different, or instead of just, no, it's not a one, I mean, it's very fluid, right? Like our health is very fluid. It's not just like a one time, oh, well, she said this should fix it. Right. Okay. Well, our body doesn't really work like that. Like, our body is very appreciative. Like if we're doing micronutrients or things that we're deficient in. Now, if you're deficient in something, yes, that can fix, or fix things, right? But like you're deficient in vitamin D, we take vitamin D, raise your vitamin D levels. Fantastic. You feel better. That would be a very straightforward case, right? But to be honest, very rarely are cases straightforward. Sometimes they are. Sometimes it's like, oh, somebody just needs magnesium and now they feel fantastic because they can go to the bathroom, right?
But that's not the majority.
That's not the majority. Yes.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah. So advocate for yourselves.
Yes.
Yeah.
It can get kind of, I think, misleading, especially like with a lot of functional medicine docs and functional medicine kind of movement. Sometimes, they will share information that feels like, oh, this supplement should fix my problem.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think that it kind of adds to that mentality, right, of like a pill should fix this problem.
Yeah.
But that's our body's much more dynamic than that. So
cool. All right. Thanks guys for listening. We'll catch you next week.
Thanks.